It began as strange things often do, in the most ordinary of settings. The cramped, familiar green room of Channel 6 News at noon. A green room that was, for all intents and purposes, no more than a dim, musty box with threadbare chairs, where the faint scent of stale coffee and cigarette smoke hung perpetually in the air. It was here, just before going live one Wednesday afternoon, that I first noticed the man. He sat in the corner, under the lurid flicker of the overhead light, his figure casting an odd shadow that seemed to reach unnaturally far across the floor. He was dressed in a faded green suit, worn thin at the elbows, with a patterned tie that seemed out of place in any era, and yet somehow timeless. His eyes, or rather the shadows over them, seemed to watch me with an unsettling intensity. "Good afternoon," I said, instinctively polite, though every nerve prickled with unease. "Are you here for an interview?" I could hardly imagine the network approving of him. He was pale and thin, with the look of one perpetually trapped in midnight. His smile was slow, deliberate, almost amused. "You might say that," he replied, his voice a kind of low echo that seemed to vibrate in the room. And then he said nothing more, offering me nothing but silence and that strange, knowing stare. I was called onto the set moments later, shaken, yet brushing it off. It was my job to present the evening news, not indulge in peculiarities. But that night, as I lay in bed, I found myself pondering his presence and the odd, almost dissonant familiarity that clung to him like a shadow. I told myself I was being absurd, that it was merely a coincidence, a stranger waiting to interview with another department perhaps. But the next night, he was there again. And the night after that. Each time, seated in precisely the same place, his suit still that particular shade of washed-out green, his face as white and still as a marble bust. By the third night, I had summoned the courage to confront him. "I don't believe we've been introduced," I began, hoping my voice would mask the slight tremor in my hands. The man tilted his head, as if mildly amused by my unease. "There are some introductions, Mr. Linton, that cannot be made with words." My blood chilled, though I forced a laugh. "And how? Pray tell. Do you know my name?" He did not answer, though his eyes gleamed with a light so disconcerting I looked away. There was something intolerably intimate in his gaze, as though he were peeling away the layers of my mind, laying bare the thoughts I kept most secret, most hidden, even from myself. "I know many things," he finally said. "More than you, Mr. Linton, or your station's viewership could bear." And with that, he was silent. Each night, the man became a fixture, as present as my own reflection, and as disturbing as a recurring nightmare. The first few days, I convinced myself he was some morbid delusion brought on by stress and overwork. I reduced my caffeine, spoke to a doctor about my sleeping habits, but nothing seemed to shake the pallor of dread that began to shadow me, both in the studio and beyond. Each time I glanced at him, he was already watching me, and his eyes carried a quiet, almost pitying expression, as if he understood some dark fate from which he could not spare me. When I finally broached the subject to my producer, he gave me a blank stare. "Your mysterious friend?" He laughed. "Linton, you work too much. Maybe you've spent a few too many late nights reading thrillers." But it was no simple delusion. For each time I went live, each time the cameras fixed their unwavering gaze upon me, I began to see him more clearly, even there. A shadow in the corner, a flicker in the camera lens, a man with pale eyes and that inscrutable green suit, watching me, waiting. And with his presence came something even stranger, a peculiar ability to know things I had never learned, to recount events I had not seen. It began with small, trivial matters. I would read from the teleprompter and realize I was anticipating the words before they appeared. But then, on one ominous afternoon, as I was wrapping up a story on a missing child, words poured from my mouth that had not been scripted. "They will find her near the lake. I said, and froze, a chill crawling up my spine as I realized what I'd said. The room went silent, the camera crew staring at me in shock. Moments later, my earpiece crackled with the voice of my producer, berating me for my unprompted statement. Yet 2 hours later, I watched, horrified as live footage revealed the girl's body, discovered exactly as he had predicted. Who is this character? How can it exist? And what does it want?